I'll let Joseph take it from here. Joseph McGuire, that is.
Thank you.
He's going to, well, I'll let him describe it. I've
Yes.
got a short definition here, but why don't you introduce the topic of your discussion today, Joseph?
Well, we're going to talk about a couple of different things. We're going to talk about one, the I call Adobe Enhance for podcasters. And the other one, we're going to talk, hopefully, intelligently about dynamic range compression, which is nothing to do with MP3s or anything like that. So a few months back, I'm not exactly sure I remember where I found it, but I got a message or something on one of my Facebook groups that do with audio drama about something called Adobe Enhance. It might even been just an ad. I don't know. And so not being a huge fan of Adobe because I'm not fond of the subscription service model, but I went and take a look and found out that they have a free, what they call beta. And so I went, well, this is interesting. And basically what they were offering was a way to take a poorly recorded voice for podcasting and podcasters and turn it into a good voice that sounded like it was in the studio. Well, that was their claim. So I decided to try it out since it was free, And so to diverge a little bit, even though we're back in the studio and we have recorded people in the studio, we still have a lot of people recorded over a web RTC real-time communication app called iris.fm. There are many out there. So, and so in general, you have to work with people who use computer mics instead of microphones like this or microphones that Tom has, that they just use their computer mic. Now, computer mics have improved tremendously since the beginning of the pandemic and over the years, but there's still problems with using a computer mic. So I decided to take one of the files and drop it in and see what happens. And it broke a long time rule of mine that I now can't use, which was you can't make bad good. You could make okay better. Well, and I don't know, I hate to use the buzzword AI, whatever that means, but they use artificial intelligence. Anyway, I dragged it in, dropped it in. It can take up to 10 minutes to process the file, and then it gives you the download. And pretty much it made bad good. It surprised the heck out of me. I've been trying to make audio files better for years. I have tools, I have audio processing tools that help me deal with certain things and try to use equalization to make it sound better. And it did it in just like less than 10 minutes. So I'm not against using a new tool. I like new tools, specifically if they work. So I've been using it for the last 2 or 3 months, even longer, possibly. And I discovered some of the things that it can do and some of the things it can't do. And so let me share the screen just so we have a visualization. And so here's some of the things that I think that go along with what I'm doing. So I want to talk about the bad or what it can't do. It can't make an unintelligible sound or voice or words intelligible. I discovered that just because I tried. So let's say you have such a bad recording of someone saying, and it's like all buzzy or all glitchy, it can't make that good. It can't distinguish between content and noise. And I'll be showing you in another form what I mean. But it just means that if there's a little bit of noise, it'll try to make that sound better. It won't be better. It'll just be better noise. And it kind of has one standard voice processing. Now, there is a version that's a subscription, and they say they can adjust that. I'm not sure how that is. And it tends to emphasize the bass of the voice, like if you were close to your microphone, or what I call the microphone effect. So is there any questions on this, the bad, or you want me to amplify anything on this or such? I like questions, if you have any. Yes?
Hi, I've noticed that we have a show that we record, and there's a prefab musical introduction. And I've run the file through an audio enhance at 90, the setting of 90. And
So you have the subscription version.
I guess I do have Adobe products, so I do get access to it.
Because you can't get that with the free version. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, it smooths out the voices, and it does make them a little more mellow, I guess I would call it, but it reduces introduction music, or it does on this file. There's a musical, or there's a voice kind of a, it's not music, I'm sorry, it's a voice introduction that's pre-recorded. And there's a little bit of music in it. And what happens is it reduces the musical background.
Yes.
So you hear the speech, but it almost reduces it too much.
Yes.
And I don't know how to play with the decibel, the percentage. Probably reducing the percentage of voice of correction might fix that, but I haven't had it long enough to play with it.
Well, this as they say in the world of interviews, this is a very good point. This is been, I believe, because it's supposedly AI, this has been trained on voices and not music. So it's considering the music noise.
Right.
And so it's trying to reduce the music to zero. That's what it's doing. Because I've done this with as some are, I do audio drama. And I did this as an experiment with a track that had sound design and all that stuff. And it started doing exactly the same thing. So I think for your case, since you have the subscription, reducing the, what did they call it? Processing?
Right. It's set at 90% or
is not going to change that.
Okay.
All that's going to do is it removes less and less of what I'm going to talk about next.
Okay.
So and that's one of, and that's a good downside that I haven't thought of, is that it's for voice only, and you can't use it for music because it will tend to make it, well, it'll reduce the wrong things. Yes, go ahead.
We did try it on a file that was voice only, and the interview was conducted outside at a restaurant. And so there was all sorts of car noises and background noise and everything, and it just cleaned all of that out. So we actually weren't going to be able to use the file at all, given this all the ambient noise. But when we ran it through that Adobe Advanced Podcast, whatever, it got rid of all of it, so we can actually use the interview quite well.
Well, that's good to know
in that situation.
That's good to know on my part. Again, it's trained on voices. That's my opinion or my hypothesis. And so anything that doesn't seem to be a voice, it probably just tries to eliminate. Any other questions? Okay. So the good. It recreates, this is what I think one of the things it does, is it recreates the full spectrum, the full frequency spectrum. And that's the processing, I think, that you're talking about in the subscription version. So I'll give an example of what I mean. So here is a file pre-Adobe Enhance. And this is uh, is in something called isotope. So it shows you that the frequency response is like cuts off at 7,000 hertz, meaning it's closer to being a telephone than it is to being a full voice spectrum. But then after Adobe Enhanced, you'll see Enhanced, it puts all the frequencies back. So that's one of the things that it does, which is why that's one of the reasons it makes it sound better. Because computer mics are, I would say that if you talked closely to your computer mic, it probably might be good, but most people talk like far away from their mic. And the further you're away from a microphone, the less it gives the frequency response goes down. Am I being clear? And so just because that's just the way microphones work. And so they just add to they make up the frequencies response. And then it reduces room reverberations. Again, when you're further away from your microphone, the more it picks up the sound. Specifically, you have to turn it up. Specifically with condenser microphones, which most computer microphones are condenser microphones. And I have noticed that it reduces pops and clicks. And we know what pops are. Those are plosives and mouth clicks, things like that. So any questions on this? This part might be pretty short. So the going back to distinguishing okay, best practices for computer recordings for people who are on computer recordings or any kind of recordings. Headphones, number one. You know, and the reason why headphones are so important is because, and this is just going into best practices for anybody using a computer mic or interviewing over something like Iris or Squadcast or Zencaster or something like that, is that if you don't, it loops back. They call it echo. I call it loop back. In other words, the person speaking on the speaker, the computer is picked up by the microphone and it loops back and it sounds like echo. Then in these particular programs, you can turn on echo cancellation. But it has a shortcoming which Adobe enhances. And that is sometimes the echo cancellation kicks in after it starts. In other words, there's this little tiny amount of loop back that you don't necessarily see on the waveform. So when you run it through Adobe Enhance, it finds those little bits of loop back and enhances them. It doesn't think of them as noise. It thinks of them because it kind of sounds voicey because it's the other person. And now I'm going to show you what I mean by that. And so here was a classic example of something that might not have been able to be fixable in the old days, but at least make it sound good. So this recording here was what happened. There was a problem with the microphone, but we got intelligence. So we had this intelligence. So I normalized it and got this. And then I ran it through. And if you go real close, you can kind of see these little bumps here. When I ran it through Enhance, those bumps became sound. And it's basically just little bits of the other person on the speaking before echo cancellation went into effect. So that's one of the things that it has problems with, is because it sounds like a voice, it enhances it. Any questions on those two things, those two topics? Yes. We can't hear you. You're muted.
In number 4, now, so we record in it's a makeshift studio, but we use the SMB7 mics, and we use Audacity.
Yes.
And does that apply here? It says normalize file to 0 dB before processing the file.
Yes, that applies to any digital audio workstation or single track audio editor. Meaning that you want to get as much sound as possible for it to process. And sometimes if people are very faint and you don't do that, then it won't do a very good job. Does everybody know what normalization is? Normalization is just where you take the file and you amplify the entire file to whatever the highest peak is, to a specific number. It can be 0, which is the top of the waveform, or it could be -3, or it could be -6. It's whatever you want to normalize it to. So everything is amplified at the same level, not to the highest peak. Yes, I saw a hand. Yes.
Yeah, I just a couple of comments. I've played with the free version a bit and actually processed 2 shows, saved 2 shows by using it. One thing I noticed though is that it kind of relates to what you've just been saying, that it makes crosstalk sound weird sometimes. It kind of gets confused between who's talking and, in the foreground and background, and can make it sound pretty strange. Also,
yes.
Go ahead.
No, next.
Yeah, the other thing I've noticed that's kind of annoying is it tends to clip words, and I think that kicks in when the sound is particularly bad to begin with. It'll end up just clipping, a couple, maybe a 50 milliseconds or a number like that off the end of words, and that also kind of.
Oh, I see what you mean. It cuts off.
Yeah, and I played around. I don't have much any control of the free version, but those are 2 things that sort of bothered me. Had to live with it for the 2 shows that.
Okay, well, I've actually run into both those situations. The first situation, remind me again. The crosstalk. I actually haven't run into that because one of the things we did when we came back to the studio, and I think this is helpful in all cases, is each person's microphone is on a separate track of a digital audio workstation. So any crosstalk or any overlapping can be dealt with by moving things around. So I'm not sure there's anything you can do about that if you're just using single track audio editing.
Yeah. Do you mean muting the background talk, or what do you mean by moving things around?
Well, meaning, I guess I best show. This is the program I use. It's called Reaper. And let me get a recent project. Here we go. So see, we have two tracks, one for each person. And so if someone is cross-talking, then you can go in and split it and then move the crosstalk away so that they're not cross-talking anymore.
Yeah, okay.
That's
that
what
makes
I mean.
sense. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, we have one host that does that a lot, and that would make a quite a project dealing with it that way, but yeah,
That's true. It takes a little more editing, but you get a little better sound.
yeah, right.
So there's not
So,
much you can do about it. And yeah, I can see why Adobe Enhance would get confused because it's two voices mixed together and it
mhm,
doesn't know.
right,
Remember, it's just a robot.
totally.
The second thing I actually have run into is sometimes people, when they finish a sentence, they start getting quieter.
Hmm.
So what you kind of have to do, at least this is what I do, is I find those places and I bring them up before I process. You know, it's like, you know, and that's why I like people who speak out and, you know, are bold. But some people just sort of start getting quieter on the end of their sentences. So you have to overcome Adobe's incompetence on knowing that it needs to amplify. It doesn't amplify anything actually, in the sense that it actually does its own normalization within the program, but it doesn't know about what we might know about, which is like end talk that needs to be brought up and stuff like that. So sometimes you have to listen to it and see that there's a problem, and then you go back to the original file and you fix it and you drop it in again. That's how I've dealt with that problem. Did I answer your questions?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Any other questions on this? Let me go back to my words. So we already talked about normalifies to 0 dB, and that's just so there's more information for it to do its job. So that's pretty much all I have to say about Adobe Enhance, unless anybody else has something else that they want to pop up with. I've been using the free version. It seems to work very well. It saves, but again, it's not the perfect solution for everything. Sometimes you have to bring your own ears and eyes into the mix, just so that it can do. In the past, if I had a lot of pops or a lot of clicks or noisy stuff, then I would go in and do some internal editing of it and using my isotope to do audio repair work before sending it in. So that can be very helpful too. It's not a perfect answer, but it's an answer we didn't have before. And it's nice. Is there anything? Do you feel like I've covered this situation very well, or covered this topic?
I'd love to hear our participants chime in with some of their solutions for. I'm not a producer myself, but if anyone has a solution or a topic that's relevant to this discussion, please join in.
Just to jump in here, I think the real solution to good sound is good acoustics and good mics. You know, we're talking about the Adobe tools to salvage situations where that wasn't the case, and that's how I've used it. I've had a couple of people who kind of on their own recorded shows, and were fairly disastrous, and Adobe saved our bacon in those cases.
Well, I actually agree with you. I mean, of course I agree with you. It's always better to have I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. It's always better to have a good mic, headphones, a room that's got some non-reverberation material. And I believe a dynamic mic is better than a condenser mic in those situations. But if you have good, you don't need to make it. You don't take Adobe and make good great, because it won't make it great.
Mhm.
I have a question, or rather a comment here from Marlena at KPFK. I don't know enough about doing this. Perhaps you can all see her comment.
Yes.
If not, I'll read it. Thanks all. I've done a ton of editing over 20 years at KPFK and currently edit 4 shows. Programmers could really use guidance as far as recording guests who have no external mic. If there is a page with instructions and advice on the Pacifica site, that's something I'll leave. Sorry, a page with instructions on how to do this on the network site. Is that what you meant, Marlena?
You said yes.
Oh, yes. I'm going to make a note of that and pass that on to Stephanie. And then perhaps we could collaborate with you, Mr. McGuire, to get something that would be clear and helpful up on our website with regards to that.
Sure. I'm always glad to help.
Great. Okay. A centralized location. Okay. Thank you, Marlena.
Joseph, were you going to talk about about compression a little bit?
Yes.
Okay.
As soon as we've, yes, go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alina. I do production at KSVR. I just wanted to throw in a suggestion. Someone else was talking about crosstalk. One of the workarounds we use is we record a show where usually the host and the guest are remote, like over internet. So we'll put it into the same track, but we'll do a hard stereo pan so that the guest is in the left and the host is in the right. And then that can help, like, especially for a quick edit, just to silence, noise that you don't want from the guest or the host, and then smash it together into mono, reprocess it back into stereo. So, yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there.
What do you use to edit? I mean, what do you use to record their voices? Let me start that. What I'm just curious. What do you use to record these voices?
We're doing Adobe Audition.
Okay, and you can't put each person on a separate track? I'm just curious.
We definitely could. We have kind of a weird setup where we're running the signal through a mixing console, and but potentially, yeah, we could just do 2 tracks. I'm sure that would be easier.
Well, I have to say, and from my experience, when we went into the pandemic mode, and I found all these web RTCs, and Squadcast was our first, and it was all each person on their own track. It was a whole new day for me as an editor. I mean, I've been editing for years and years and years and years. And when I did that, I was just like, wow, I can't go back. It's hard. And so that's when we got some new equipment for our radio station, and we got an Allen and Heath mixer, and we made sure each microphone would go into each track. And I couldn't go back. It would be impossible. I would feel like my feet were in cement because it just makes it so much easier. But
Yeah,
if you
so
don't have
would you
that tools, go ahead.
Oh, I just wondered, like, would you recommend, out of what you've used, would you say Squadcast, or would you say this one you mentioned you're using Iris FM, or what does the group think is kind of the best as far as like, and I was talking low budget because we're probably
Okay.
all community.
So, pretty much WebRTC is the same for all these organizations. It stands for real-time communications, but they give you little advances, little enhances. Now, we were using Squadcast, but Squadcast decided to raise the price without giving us more for our dollar. So I found another one called Iris.fm. As an example, Squadcast would only allow you to have 4 people, and Iris allows you to have eight people plus the host. Squadcast charged extra if you wanted video. Iris does not. It's not great video, but it's video. We don't use it, but it's there. And so it all depends. You just have to investigate. The thing about Iris is for 2 hours of recording, it's only like $20 a month, which sounds, if I only got $20, that's it.
Yeah.
But you can do like for $10 a month. I mean, it's got tiered things. And you can, if you're not going to use it for a while, you can always cancel it and then come back. And the other reason I liked Iris, and when I was searching for a new one after Squadcast, is it has its own cloud recording, its own cloud drive. So you didn't have to use Google Dropbox or Google Drive or Dropbox. And so it just, and then you can download it whenever you want. And of course, just to mention, the reason these are better than, say, just doing Zoom is because, and I just have to say this, because they are guest side recorded. They're recorded on each person's computer, and then it's uploaded to the cloud. So you're as good as what they have. If they have a USB mic, they're great. Like we were talking about, Tom, that if they have the good stuff, then they're good. If they don't, it's still better because there's no internet glitches and all that stuff. So I did a way back in the early days of the pandemic, and then later on there's a video of me going on about this. But that's one of the reasons why I like these, is because it's that way.
Yeah, there's during the pandemic, we used actually Squadcast for recording everything, didn't include the studio. We had one participant that was on a regular show that had his network connection was too poor to do Squadcast, which is very network demanding.
It is.
So we used Zoom and had him and the other participants record the audio at the same time on their computers, and then they'd email a link to me, and surprisingly easy to sync up audio.
Yes, it is actually.
Yeah,
that's another way to do it. Yes.
Yeah, and that's kind of a poor man's way of getting around that problem, but it requires the participants to do more stuff, and that can be a challenge. Yeah.
Audio Drama uses that thing all the time. Some do. And I'm always afraid someone's not going to press the record button.
Yeah, well, it's one of the things I really was insisting on. Okay, everybody, did you press record? Check again,
I actually was part of Planet Money came to us and asked us to record, and we did this. Planet Money wanted to talk to a guy who ran a trucking company. His family ran a trucking company. So they rented our studio, and that's what we did. We used Zoom, and then I recorded on the internal recording, and it worked out fine. They didn't complain.
Yeah, it really works well if you can get everybody to do what they have to do. And
but that's why I like WebRTC, is you don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, right. Same with.
Anyway, I need to go into dynamic range compression. So I think we've dealt with this subject.
Okay. All right, then take it away, Joseph.
Okay. I want to preface this. This is a very technical thing. And if you don't get it after this, I suggest you read up a lot about it, because it took me a long time to get it. So I've tried very carefully with this presentation to explain it as easily as I can, but it is a technical subject. Now, I'm going to hit the share screen. And go here. And so dynamic range compression, how to level your sound. Of course, we know that, or maybe some of us know that waveforms are measured in dB, or actually in negative dB, because you don't want to go past the 0 point, because that's sort of past the bandwidth or how much information a digital audio track or file can hold. And it all depends on how much, 16-bit, 24-bit, 44 1K, 48K, that type of thing. But we just know that we measure sounds in negative dB. The middle part is infinite, meaning there's no actual true dead silence. So it just means what we can't hear. And so normalization, we talked about that earlier. Amplifying a file to make the audio the loudest it can be is called normalization. It can be set to 0 dB or less. And as you see my circle, you'll see that those are the peaks that are highest. So it amplified the entire file to those peaks, where that little orange teardrop is the highest peak in the file. So that's what it normalized to. So if you will see as examples, we have original, normalized, we have something called compressed, and we have normalized. You'll notice how you get a fuller sound after you've did dynamic range compression and then normalized to 0 dB, as opposed to original and normalized. I'm going to stop here for a moment to see if there's any questions. Okay. Either I've completely confused you, or I'm telling you, you know what you understand. So now we have dynamic range. What is dynamic range? Well, that's the quietest to the loudest. And our ears hear are 140 decibels of dynamic range. That doesn't mean we want to hear 140 decibels of sound, because we shouldn't listen to sound over like 60 or 70 decibels, or will injure our ears. But you'll see I call it quiet as a mouse, loud as a rock band. Everybody's heard the 1812 overture, correct? So
Yes.
if you see, this top one is just a normal 1812 overture. It's pretty much the same one as the bottom one, but you'll see that it's got lots of dynamic range, lots of lows, lots of highs, because that's how 1812 overture works. There's cannons and little tiny sounds. If you compress it, and we'll understand a little more about this in the next slide. When you compress it, you're taking the loudest sounds, reducing them to the same level as the quietest sound, and then you're amplifying or normalizing to 0 dB, and that's what you get. You get no dynamic range whatsoever. So again, I have to ask, if you have any questions to amplify upon this, please ask. Okay. Stop. So when you're dealing with non-music or your voice, people go up and down a lot. And so you want to stop the peaks in the voice from going too high and making everything kind of sound the same. So that's what's called the threshold, where we want to stop the sound from going over. And in this case, we stop the sound at negative 8 dB. And so it just sort of, any peaks that go above that threshold are stopped. So how do you reduce the peaks in a dynamic range compressor? Well, it's through something called ratio: 2-to-1, 4-to-1, 8-to-1, 12-to-1, 1-to-1. 1-to-1 means there's no dynamic range compression. 2-to-1 means you reduce it, like we're starting out with relative to the peak. We're trying to reduce it 10 dB. And so if we put it 2-to-1, we'll reduce it 5-to-1. In other words, it cuts it in half. If we do 4-to-1, it cuts it by a quarter, or it actually makes it zero, or it makes it reach the threshold. This is the most technical part of the whole point of dynamic range compression, and it took me a long time to figure this out. So I can understand if it's confusing. There's a setting that says dynamic range, and you want to reduce the peaks that are above threshold by a value of 2-to-1 or 4-to-1 or 8-to-1 or such. Threshold is the most important thing. You want to make a threshold that doesn't put everything into one level, so you still have peaks and valleys, but you don't necessarily, you see, like this person talking, the first part, they're talking kind of loud with lots of peaks, and then the second part, this is sort of goes back to when we were dealing with sound at the end of people's voices, how it can disappear, and Adobe Enhance can't pick it up. This is one way of doing that, so that you make everything sort of the same level. Any questions? Yes, please.
When we use Audacity, they have a default compression setup.
Yes.
And I don't have it in front of me, but the first one is, and they pick 12 minus 12 dB as a standard.
As the threshold.
Yes, and you can play with that, of course. You can go up or down, but and I've used it, and it does even out. It makes a more even file in terms of the spoken voice. And things seem to sound a little bit smoother.
Yes.
But I don't know, that's the default. So I'm not sure. I don't know how to use this to my advantage, really. I just took the default and ran the file through it. And
well, no, that's a very good observation. So what I look at is I look at all the peaks and see where all the peaks are going, like for instance, if you want to make it normalization to -3 dB, I look at all the peaks and I see, well, what peaks can I get eliminate so I can bring the file up louder? And that's just a matter. So if you look at the peaks, like we didn't have to do it to -15 dB. Let's say we did it to -12, and you would see that it's just these peaks here that you have these peaks, those big peaks that you have to work with. So you might set it to -10 or -8 just to see if that reduces it so everything else is the same. Because you want to be careful about dynamic range compression, is because if you bring things and you can actually remove any dynamic range, and then the voice sounds the same. It sounds loud, but without being loud. It says it's -12, but it sounds loud. Like yes, go ahead.
One of the speakers, there are two speakers who engage in dialogue back and forth.
Yes.
One of them has a very powerful voice.
Yes.
So in the mixer, I try to get levels for each one, and
absolutely.
In Audacity, there's a graph, and it goes you can go into a yellow, you're in a green. Then if you get a little bit into a yellow range, would mean you're getting up there. And then of course, red is you want to try to avoid the red zone because that's too loud.
Of course, that's
But
clipping.
these guys laugh a lot, they joke around, so they shoot into the red fairly often. But in a normal conversational tone, one of them will be powerful and the other one is less so.
I call it
And
resonance. One is
okay,
more resonant than the other. They
right,
they give off a booming voice, even
yes,
when they're talking, how you doing?
right.
And yes, I've dealt with that.
And so after
Uh,
compression, it allows the person who's got a quieter voice to come up a little bit.
so one of the things I want to comment about that is you're not what you're doing is you're taking the person who has the resonant voice and you're reducing them. You're not bringing the other person up.
Okay,
That's what the compression does, is it reduces it. And then when
okay,
you when you amplify, it's called makeup gain. That's when you're getting everybody sounding the same level. It's like taking a drum track and you reduce it down to the guitar track, and then you amplify it so the drum track and the guitar track sound exactly the same level. It's the same with the voice.
We have a question from Tom.
Yes,
Joseph?
go ahead.
Yeah, just a couple of things.
Absolutely.
The Audacity compressor allows, depending on your settings, it'll bring the quiet part up and the loud part down. It's sort of, has both of those features. And I tend to like to bring the quiet parts up and kind of consistently, because that's the part that's
Well,
kind of hard
I
hard to
haven't
hear.
used Audacity in
Yeah,
years, if
yeah.
possibly decades.
Yeah. So it does have that. The other point is for James, have you tried Level Speech, Audacity plugin? Uh, it's
no,
it's it does a better job than the compressor on speech, and I don't know the inner workings, but for example, when you just use the compressor, it'll bring breath sounds up, which you probably don't want to do.
right,
And Level Speech does that less, although it still does it to some extent. But try downloading and installing that plugin, and I use it all the time. It seems to do a really good job of improving the speech sound quality.
thank you.
Yes, there are plugins that are called levelers, and I have no one way or another to say about them.
Mhm. Also, I just throw in there, I normalize all the voices using replay gain, which doesn't normalize based on peaks. It normalizes based on kind of the average loudness over the whole track. And that seems to be a good starting point for editing voice sound.
Well, that wasn't something I was going to go into because that's a whole nother ball game.
Okay.
But well, just to briefly talk about it, is loudness units. Are you still waving your hand?
No, I tried to. I thought I shut it off. I guess you
There you go.
shut it off. There you go.
Anyway, loudness units, which is an algorithmic sound level that they developed in Europe and is now used in all of broadcasting, radio and television, and used over here in television. And it's an entirely different thing I can talk about in some other time. But loudness is kind of an average. So that's the difference. The two differences is what you're talking about is peak normalization and loudness normalization.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about replay because I'm not sure how that works, but I do know about loudness. And loudness normalizes the file based on hearing it for the entire thing. And then it raises the level. the problem with loudness normalization is the standard doesn't care about going over the 0 point. So you can get clipping. So what they
Yeah,
add
clip.
is another form of compression called limiting, which is what most people call brick wall limiting. They limit it with a brick wall. You can't go past this no matter how hard you try. But we are not going to go into that too much. It's just there's two different kinds of normalization. I chose to stay with peak because that's what most people have. When they're in Audacity or whatever program, they have a normalizer that you can set to have the highest peak at a certain level.
Yeah, I've heard of loudness also. I don't think Audacity has that plugin that does replay gain, but it's the same concept. They call it psychoacoustics or something like that, where it's based on a model of human hearing.
Yeah, that's
And-
that. It's probably loudness. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
loudness.
yeah.
And that's what it is. Reaper has that built in. I'm going to do a little plug. I believe in Reaper as a replacement for Audacity, as a replacement for everything that you would use for Audacity, because, and it is money. It does cost money, but it's only $60, and it's yours forever, just like Audacity. You get 2 version updates, but it has the loudness standard built into it. You don't have to have plugins. So anyway, enough of my proselytization of Reaper.
I'll definitely take a look at it. Yeah.
I just think it's a true digital audio workstation. Audacity has moments of being a digital audio workstation and moments of not. And it's truly non-destructive. Anyway, so the way there's another part that we're going to talk a little bit about, and that's called attack and release. And that's how fast the compressor does its job. And it's kind of simple. So the thing's going along and it's listening, and then all of a sudden it peaks out. So how fast you want to attack that sound, and how, it's kind of like a piano. And when you want, how much you want the piano to hit hard or hit softly or let it fade away, or you want it to cut off. It's pretty much just like that. And there's these are the settings that you kind of have to set. I've discovered that a fast attack on voice and a release that lets out is the best answer. And so, and then we were just going to talk, we've already talked about makeup gain, and that's pretty much it for dynamic range compression. Again, I can't possibly teach it in like a half hour, 15 minutes. This is just sort of an overview so that you can investigate on your own. But let me show you a plugin of what I use that has all the tools you need for compression. It's from a German company. It's called Melda Productions. It's free. They have a whole bunch of free plugins that you can get, but it has all the tools you need. It has attack, release, threshold, ratio, and you can see it visually. You can see the input and output, and knee size. Again, I can't go into everything in this short a time. It took me, 10 years to figure this out. But once you get it, it's really a nice tool. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if there's any further questions. And I hope that I taught something this time.
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
And I am recording this, of course, so
Oh, yes, this will be on.
we can refer to it.
And if anybody ever needs any help, I'm always willing to, help out. I like teaching this stuff. Specifically, if you want to learn Reaper, anybody who wants to use Reaper and want to learn Reaper, I can give a little instruction on getting you up to speed.
Okay, good to know.
Good.
I think we can stop now.
All right. Unless anybody else has some comments, I want to just to Marlena, I got the gist of your message down, and that sounds like a great idea for something. We just recently completed a sort of a how-to and to put on our website, and this will be a good addition to that. So I'll be visiting with Stephanie, and perhaps Stephanie can contact you, Joseph, if she has
course.
any questions putting that together. And I want to thank you all so much, very much for a very informative topic that, like I said, I'm not a producer, and I found it really fascinating with things that I really know very little about.
Well, maybe someday you'll start editing. It's fun.
Yeah.
Anyway, you've been a very good audience.
I filled in with a little bit on a very small, in a very small way, taking out ums and ers and then turning it over to the boss. All right. Well, if that's all, I'd like to say thanks for coming today, and hopefully see you next week. I do
Okay.
not know what the topic is next week, but it'll
You
be
mean next
posted.
month?
Pardon?
You mean next month?
Next month. Yes, thank you. Yes.
That's okay.
Yes, we used to do them weekly.
I know. I was there. Anyway, thank you very much. You've been a fine
All
audience.
right. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.